Hey, what's up? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have a very exciting video planned because I'm going to be tier ranking every single book that I read in the year of 2021. This is going to be no simple task because I have read 167 books this year, so it's going to be quite a lot of tier ranking. And I thought this year to just, mix it up because I ended up doing this last year and I really do love the concept of tier ranking books. But to mix it up this year, you might be wondering why I'm wearing my Taylor Swift shirt. Maybe you're not wondering because you're like, that's nothing new, bitch. See what I did there with the nothing new pun? What's up? But I decided this year that I would rank all the books that I read this year based on different Taylor Swift lyrics. Stick with me. I think it's a really cool concept. So on my tier list this year, I have like 8 different tiers. The top tier that I can assign books to is going to be It Was Rare, I Was There, I Remember It All Too Well. Because these are the books that are rare, like I don't read 5-star books super often. And this shelf is going to be reserved for my absolute top favorites that I read this year. The second tier is going to be I Bet You Think About Me. And so these are going to be, like the 4-star books, the books that I really enjoyed still. They weren't exactly like 5-star, like top tier books. I mean, maybe they were 5 stars, but they weren't like rare 5 stars, if you know what I'm saying. But these are the books that I still think about all the time, so like I Bet You Think About Me, it just seems fitting. And then the next third tier is going to be Maybe We Got Lost in Translation, Maybe I Asked for Too Much, because this is going to be, the 3-star books, or the books that I just feel kind of meh about, like there was something missing in this for me, like maybe I was just expecting too much going into it, or maybe like there was just a disconnect there for like some kind of reason why I didn't end up enjoying that book more. The next one is going to be I Forgot That You Existed, which basically means just the books that I like don't even remember that I read this year, because as I said, I read 167 books this year, so like my memory is not the best with all of these, and I'm sure some of these they're going to be like 2-star or maybe even 3-star books, but they're like super forgettable. So any books that are really forgettable, they're gonna go on this one here. And then I have Long Story Short, It Was a Bad Time. And these are gonna be for like, the 2 stars or maybe even the 3 stars that were just like not the most enjoyable experience for me. Those are going in Long Story Short, It Was a Bad Time. And then the next tier is going to be No One Likes a Mad Woman, You Made Her Like That. And this is gonna be one that's for like my 1-star books, or like the books that actually made me angry. This could even be like 2-star books, but like they just made me really mad, for one reason or another. So that's what that's here for. And then these last 2 tiers are just for some random things. So I have Will You Still Want Me When I'm Nothing New? And these are going to be for my rereads that I had this year, because I actually did end up rereading, I think, about 9 books this year. So all of my rereads will probably be going on this shelf. That is, if I did still want them when they were nothing new. Because I did have some rereads this year that were disappointing, but we'll talk about that. And then the bottom tier says This Love Is Difficult, But It's Real. Because these are for my nonfiction books. Isn't that so cute? Real for like the nonfiction picks. Anyways, I thought it was so adorable. And so yeah, these are the 8 tiers that I'm going to be putting all of the books that I read this year into. I'm just like super excited for this list. I think it's gonna be a super fun time. All right, so let's just get started. I have a lot of books to get through here. So very first thing is gonna be Come Closer, and I know that I just read this book like very recently, but honestly, like I forgot that you existed. Like this book did not leave any kind of impression, like lasting impression on me whatsoever. And then Aristotle and Dante, this one's actually a reread, so I'm gonna put this in Will You Still Want Me When I'm Nothing New, because absolutely I love Aristotle and Dante. This was my 3rd time rereading it. Horror Store, I'm just gonna put it in Maybe We Got Lost in Translation, Maybe I Asked for Too Much, because I liked some things about this book, but I feel like it was just a middle-of-the-road 3-star book for me. Like, I think I just went in expecting a little bit too much. The Song of Achilles, I'm gonna put this in I Bet You Think About Me, because I've been thinking about this book a lot this year. I actually read it in January, and it's like stayed on my mind pretty much like a lot this year, and I do think this book is a little bit overhyped though. That's why it's not going in my top one, but I still enjoyed the story for the most part. Ugly Love. See, this is where it's tough because this was a reread, but I didn't enjoy it as much the next time around. So I think I'm gonna put it maybe we got lost in translation because I think I did go in expecting too much, because I already knew I gave it 5 stars the last time that I read it, so I think I just expected for this time to be the same, and it was not the same. And then The Winter People, this is definitely a moment where it was rare. I was there. I remember it all too well. This is one of my top faves of the year. Confessions, I'm putting it in I Bet You Think About Me because I think about this book constantly, and the plot twists, they were so good. Station 11, this is going to be another one. I Bet You Think About Me because I do. The Elementals, I'm kind of torn between putting it in Long Story Short, It Was a Bad Time and I Forgot That You Existed, but I'm gonna have to put it in Long Story Short, It Was a Bad Time because I was just so bored while reading this book, like so immensely bored. And then Confess is also a reread for me, but it's gonna go in Long Story Short, It Was a Bad Time because, oh my god, this book was just not, it was not great the second time around. A Head Full of Ghosts, I think I'm gonna put this one in Maybe I Asked for Too Much because I think I went into this one with a little bit too high of expectations. An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, I'm gonna put this one in Long Story Short, It Was a Bad Time because it just, like, no. Him, this was a reread that I absolutely loved, so I would definitely still want this book even when it's nothing new. The Hating Game, this was another reread for me, so this one's going on that same tier. Okay, No One Gets Out Alive. This is going in No One Likes a Mad Woman, You Made Her Like That, because this book just kind of made me mad. It just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. It made me a little nauseous, but, like, not in a fun way. And I was just kind of like, I don't know. This book just went downhill for me so fast, Ooh, I Let You Go. This is gonna go in I Bet You Think About Me because that plot twist, I do think about it. The Night Sister, okay, this makes me sad, but I think I'm gonna put it in I Forgot That You Existed because when I was looking at some of my Jennifer McMahon books, I looked at The Night Sister and, like, for a minute I forgot what it was even about. So, like, that's not a good sign. The Deep, I'm gonna put this one in I Bet You Think About Me because Nick Cutter, phenomenal. The Troop, this is another Nick Cutter book, and yeah, I reread this one this year, so I do still want this book when it's nothing new. This book is fantastic. Oh my gosh, okay, You Should Have Left. This was my #1 worst book of the year, so, I've got to put it in No One Likes a Mad Woman, You Made Her Like That. I've got to. Into the Drowning Deep is a book that I very much still think about a lot. Firefly Lane, I'm just gonna put it in Long Story Short, It Was a Bad Time. I know everybody loves this book. I actually really enjoyed the TV show, but I didn't like the book. I know that I have the unpopular opinion with this, but I just can't. Stolen Tongues, this has got to be a it was rare moment where it was a 5-star book. It was fantastic. Same with Jar of Hearts. This was also fantastic. This one was surprising because I did not expect to love this one the way that I did. The Death of Miss Westaway by Ruth Ware. I think this one's got to go in Maybe We Got Lost in Translation because I think I just went into this one with a little bit too high of expectations, and, like, Ruth Ware is just so hit or miss for me. I just never know. The Cabin at the End of the World, this was a reread for me this year, so this one's going in I Do Still Want It when it's nothing new. My Sister the Serial Killer, ooh. I think I'm gonna have to put this one also in, like, Maybe We Got Lost in Translation and I Asked for Too Much, because I think I just expected a little bit more going into this one because it was so hyped, and I just thought it was alright. The Taking of Jake Livingston. I think I'm also going to have to put it in the same category, like Maybe I Asked for Too Much, because this one just ended up being another, like, middle-of-the-road book for me. Like, I wasn't mad about it, but I didn't love it. It was just fine. Then I have Split Tooth. This is another one that I think I'm going to have to put it in Maybe We Got Lost in Translation. I'm kind of even struggling right now to remember what rating I even gave this book. Okay, and then The Invited by Jennifer McMahon. While I did enjoy this book, I honestly don't think about it very much after reading it, so I feel like I can't put it in this 4-star category, even though I think I did give this one 4 stars. But I think I'm going to put it in Maybe We Got Lost in Translation because I think I did go into this book wanting a little bit more out of it. And it just wasn't, like, top tier favorite for me, like, it just ended up being fine. Dig by A.S. King is a book that I do still think about, so I'm gonna put that one in this tier. And then The Haunting of Hill House is also a book that I still think about. I really enjoyed The Haunting of Hill House. And then I have The Good House, which this is another one that I'm gonna put in Maybe We Got Lost in Translation because this book is one that I just expected to love more than I did. Ninth House, okay, Ninth House I think I'm also gonna have to put in the same tier. This tier is gonna fill up really quick because I feel so meh about a lot of books, to be honest. Rewind by Catherine Ryan Howard. I'm gonna put this one in I Forgot That You Existed because I barely even remember the fact that I read this year, and it was such a like middle of the road 3-star book for me. Writers and Lovers, I would also put this in I Forgot That You Existed because I read this all the way back in January and I vaguely remember the plot of this book. Hide and Seeker, I think this is going to be one that I put, maybe I asked for too much just because this one's a middle grade book, so I don't really know if I went in with the right expectations because I don't really read middle grade often. The Maidens, I know people are going to be mad about this, but I've got to put it up with It Was Rare, I Was There, I Remember It All Too Well, just because I love this book. I know everybody's a hater on this book, but I really enjoyed it. It was a 5-star thriller for me, and I just love this author. I'll read anything that he writes. And then The Hunting Wives, like, same. I know this book also has a lot of haters, but I freaking loved it. I kind of love thrillers that are, like, over the top sometimes, you know? It's just great. A Good Girl's Guide to Murder is another one. That was a 5-star, like, one of my favorites of this year. It was just so freaking good. Memorial, honestly, I kind of forgot that this book existed. This one is one that I read. It was like one of the very first books that I read in 2021, and it just ended up being like fine, you know, like it was like a middle of the road, like 3-star, I think. A Lot's Away also ended up being one of my favorites of this year. It was definitely a surprise because this book is a little bit out of my comfort zone, genre-wise, but I really enjoyed A Lot's Away. Okay, Tender as the Flesh is definitely going, and I Bet You Think About Me because, oh my gosh, like how could you not think about Tender as the Flesh after you've read it? Honey Girl is probably going to be another book that I'll put in I Bet You Think About Me because even though I don't think about this book very much, I really enjoyed this one. I read it back in February. Confessions on the 745. I'm also going to put this one in I Bet You Think About Me. God, I feel like these 2 tiers are going to fill up so freaking fast because most books are probably going to fit into those. Like Ties That Tether, I'm going to put this in I Bet You Think About Me because I really enjoyed that one. Camp Slaughter, see this is going to go in No One Likes a Mad Woman because Camp Slaughter was just so frustrating to read. And then, wow, The Wrong Family immediately after that. This is another one that's going to go in No One Likes a Mad Woman. You made her like that. This book made me angry. And then The Heart Principle, even though I think this book could fit into either of these 2 tiers, I Bet You Think About Me, or maybe We Got Lost in Translation, just because I went into this book with a little bit of false expectations, and it made me a lot more emotional than I was ready for or anticipating at all. But I am going to put it in I Bet You Think About Me just because I really ended up enjoying it. It was just like sad as fuck. Ooh, The Fixed Stars. We have our first nonfiction book. I really enjoyed this one. It was really interesting. Next is We Ride Upon Sticks. I'm just gonna put long story short, it was a bad time. Like, I was just so confused the whole time I was reading this book. And I feel bad because I know a lot of people do love this one, but it was just not for me, not my thing. We Begin at the end. This is definitely a situation where I asked for too much. I just expected way too much from this book and it ended up being so mediocre. And then In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. This is definitely going into my top tier favorites of the year. So freaking good. Watch Over Me. Okay, I know that I enjoyed this one, but honestly, I kind of forgot that you existed. I like just looked at that right now and I was like, I read that one this year. Like, I'm so confused. Like, sometimes it just happens, you know, like some books stick with you and some just don't. And that's just life. The Haunting of Bryn Wilder. This one made me mad. The ending pissed me off for sure. Okay, Act Your Age, Eve Brown. This is one where I definitely asked for too much because the first 2 books in this series were 5 stars for me. And then for some reason, Act Your Age, Eve Brown ended up being like a 3-star. Like, it was fine, but I just thought it was going to be one of my favorites and it wasn't, so it made me sad. And then Ace. This is another nonfiction. This one's probably my favorite nonfiction book that I read this year because it's about asexuality. And I've never read a nonfiction book that's about asexuality. Alright, and then next we have The Wife Stalker. I'm just going to put this one in long story short, it was a bad time because these characters just drove me absolutely crazy. Like, I do know that the ending of this book, it has a fairly decent plot twist, but I was just frustrated the entire time I was reading this because characters, ugh. Then Follow Me to Ground. This one's gotta go in like my, okay, I think I'm gonna put it in I Bet You Think About Me because it wasn't like one of my absolute top favorites of this year, but this is a book that I definitely did not expect to love as much as I did, and I definitely think about this book a lot still. And then Who is Maud Dixon? This is another one that I would put in I Bet You Think About Me because this was a really good thriller. And then same with The Echo Wife. I would also put this one in I Bet You Think About Me because this book had a really cool concept, and this is definitely one that I've thought of this year more than once. Same with For Your Own Good. I would put this one in I Bet You Think About Me. Really good thriller. And then The Push. This is definitely one of my top favorites of the year. It was rare. I loved it. I read this book twice this year. And then She Drives Me Crazy. I'm going to put this in I Bet You Think About Me because it was really cute. When I Was You, low-key kind of forgot that this book existed, to be honest. It was a very middle-of-the-road thriller for me. I don't remember much about it. Concrete Rose. Oof. Okay, I gotta put this in I Bet You Think About Me because this book was so great. And I loved learning more about Star's dad when he was like becoming a teen parent. It was very beautiful. Ooh, We Need to Do Something. I'm gonna put this one in I Bet You Think About Me because I do think about this book quite often. This one's like a horror novella that was just so fascinating. And then If I Disappear. This is definitely a situation where I asked for too much, and this is one that I was like so disappointed by because the beginning was so freaking good and so promising, and then somewhere around the like halfway point it just got so boring and so repetitive. And then the Falling in Love montage, I would put this in I Bet You Think About Me because this is one of those like rare young adult books that I really, really loved and connected with the main characters. The Wife Upstairs is definitely a book that I still think about. I really enjoyed it. Too Good to Be True is a book that I really enjoyed, so it'll go in I Bet You Think About Me. The Good Sister, this is another one that I was really surprised that I enjoyed it because previously I had not really enjoyed this author's books. So that one is going in I Bet You Think About Me. And then, oh my gosh, The Four Winds. This is one of my favorites of this year. So it's going to go in the top tier. And then same with Finlay Donovan is down here next. This is also one of my top tier faves of the year. And then next we have Nothing But Black and Teeth, which is one of my worst books of the year, which means it's going to go in Mad Woman. All's Well is going to be one that I'm going to put maybe I asked for too much because I definitely went in with way too high of expectations after Bunny. Alright, and then Dial A for Aunties. This was I Bet You Think About Me. It was super cute, super fun. Last Call. This one is a nonfiction. It's like a true crime book that was very, very interesting. And most of it was about a serial killer that was in New York. It was fascinating. The Burning Girls is one that I definitely still think about. This is actually one that I kind of want to reread because my memory's a little bit fuzzy on it, but I do remember really enjoying it. Fat Chance Charlie Vega. This one is one that maybe I asked for too much. It was a young adult book, so maybe I just like, you know, I don't know, like young adult is so hit or miss for me these days. And this one was just fine. X Talk was one of my favorites of this year. I gotta move it all the way up. I definitely remember it all too well. It was so great. One of my favorite romances of this year. And then Pretty Little Wife. Oof, this is one that I definitely still think about. I think this one was so freaking good. Alright, and then Some Girls Do. I'm going to put long story short, it was a bad time. Because even though this book ended up being fine, I think for the most part, like these characters were just very frustrating to read after a while. Every Vow You Break. I kind of want to put it in like, maybe I asked for too much. But also, like, no one likes a mad woman, you made her like that, because this ending just made me really mad. But I think I'm just going to put it in, you know, maybe I asked for too much, because with a Peter Swanson book, I just automatically go in with higher expectations than normal, because I love Peter Swanson. Ooh, The Drowning Kind by Jennifer McMahon. This is definitely one of my top favorites of this year, so this has got to go all the way to the top tier. The Final Revival of Opal and Nev. Oh, this is one that I definitely still think about. So freaking good. I love the vibes of this book, and the way it's all told in like interview style is really cool. And then we have The Dating Plan. This is actually one that I still think about. This was actually the first book that I read in 2021, way back then. And this is a romance that just, it made me happy. Like, I just remember being happy reading this. It was a good time. Just One Look is another book that I do think about. I actually have thought about like rereading this one because my memory started to get a little bit fuzzy on it. But I just remember enjoying it so much. Like, this was a 5-star thriller for me. And then Arsenic and Adobo, This one just ended up being fine for me, so I've got to put this in. Maybe I asked for too much. I just thought that this was gonna be like top tier, like Finlay Donovan, and then it ended up being like fine. You know, like I wasn't a huge fan of the mystery aspect in this book. It just wasn't as fun. Oh my gosh, then Project Hail Mary. This was my favorite book of the year, so this has got to go all the way to my top of the top tier, because it was rare for a sci-fi book to be like my number one book of the year. Like that is the most rare thing that I've ever heard in my life. All right, and then what comes after? This is one that I put in I Bet You Think About Me, because I do still think about this book. It was like a really heartfelt, beautiful mystery kind of story. It was really good. Goblin. I've got to put this one in It Made Me Mad, because I just wanted to love this so badly, and the stories just got like progressively worse as you continue reading in this one. And I ultimately ended up DNFing it. So like that's how you know it made me mad. Local Woman Missing ended up being one of my top favorites of this year, so it's gotta go all the way up to the top tier. This is another ridiculous thriller that I know a lot of people don't really care for, but I loved. And then Near the Bone, this is another one of my favorites of this year. Gotta move it all the way up. I'm having trouble reaching this top tier, so I'm thinking I might just move these ones. I know it'll mess with the color aesthetic, honestly, but just moving this to the top for now. So I know it's gonna mess with the color aesthetic right now, but I wanted to move these two to the top because I don't have a lot of these, so I can easier access these that I do have a lot of for now. Okay. Anyways, Later by Stephen King. This is definitely one that I still think about. I did actually really enjoy this book, even though I went on kind of a rant when this book got nominated for horror, because I don't really think this book is super horror, but I did really enjoy this one. You Love Me. I think this has got to be one that I just asked for too much, you know, because this is like the Joe Goldberg books. I just thought that I would love this one, and it ended up being fine. I think they're getting a little bit repetitive for me, to be honest. One Last Stop, this is definitely one that I had way too high of expectations going into. It just ended up being fine. Just expected to love this one because I loved Red, White, and Royal Blue so much, and it just ended up being alright. Anatomy of Desire, this one was really interesting, but I kind of forgot that it existed, to be honest, because it's not one that I think about very much, but I did enjoy it, but I kind of forgot that it existed, you know? Alright, next up is going to be Life's Too Short, and I think this is going to be another one where I just like kind of asked for too much, because I think I just wanted more from this book. I don't know, this book just wasn't what I was thinking it would be going into it. It was a lot more sad than I was anticipating, but like not in a good way, and like not in a fun way. And I just kind of hate this trend that I'm seeing in romances now, where like the third book in a series will randomly be like really sad. The Last Thing He Told Me, this is gonna go in long story short, it was a bad time. Like I don't really understand the hype with this thriller. I don't even think it should count as a thriller because it's not very thrilling at all. It's like a very light mystery, and I didn't give a fuck about the mystery either. People We Meet on Vacation, this is going into my top tier. One of my favorite romances of this year. Same with Hang the Moon. Hang the Moon was so freaking great. The Collective is one that I definitely still think about. It's not one of my favorite thrillers ever, but the concept is really interesting, and I really enjoyed this one. Okay, the next one is the John Green, of course. It's like the nonfiction, so it's gotta go all the way up to the nonfiction. But this also is one of my favorite nonfiction books that I read this year, and I was really surprised by that because, you know, John Green's young adult books are pretty cringe and usually not my thing. But this one was actually really interesting. It was like a collection of essays, and I just had a really good time listening to this one on audio. And then We Are the Brennans. I kind of forgot it existed, to be honest. Like, I read this one over the summer. And then Carrie, unfortunately, it was, long story short, it was a bad time. I just didn't really enjoy Carrie very much. I don't know. And then The Stand, I've got to put in, I think I got to put it in, maybe I asked for too much, just because I wanted a little bit more from this book. It just wasn't my fave, even though that book is 1,200 pages. It's the longest book that I read this year, and I guess I just wanted more from it, you know? Like, I wanted to learn more about the actual flu pandemic in this book. I feel like it was very brushed over for the most part, even though that's mainly what this entire book is about. And then The Plot ended up being one of my favorites of the year, so it's got to go in the top tier here. Lizzie and Dante. I think this is another one where we just got lost in translation. I wasn't a fan. It was kind of like one of those Nicholas Sparks kind of books where it just really tries to make you cry, and I was just kind of annoyed by that. Hairpin Bridge is one that made me mad. So No One Likes a Mad Woman, because this one made me mad. It was one of my worst books of the year. And then same with The Minders. This one also made me mad because not only did it spoil two other John Marrs books, but it was also just not a very fun time to read this one. And then we have Switch by A.S. King. This one's going in long story short. It was a bad time because I was so freaking confused the entire time I was reading this. Malibu Rising is definitely a situation where I asked for too much because Taylor Jenkins Reid is my favorite author, and I think I just went into this one expecting something different. I just wanted to love it, and I didn't end up loving it, and it makes me sad still. When the Reckoning Comes is definitely a book that I still think about. I think this book is so freaking great. It's a horror novel. Isn't It Bromantic is a book where I definitely asked for too much. Isn't It Bromantic is the fourth book in the Bromance Book Club series, and I feel like the series has just gone so downhill with like every book. What If You and Me was shockingly one of my favorite romances of the year, so I think I gotta put this one in the top tier category because it was so freaking good. It was so cute. I love that it had a horror writer as the female protagonist lead. Like, how cool is that? The Last House on Needless Street is definitely a book that I still think about, very much so. One of the most unique and interesting books that I read this year. Ace of Spades is another book that I still think about. This book was super fascinating. Major Get Out vibes with this one. May the Best Man Win. This is another one that kind of made me mad. Like, not gonna lie, this one ended up in my worst of the year list. And then this one, The Girls. What is this even called? The Girls. I don't even know what this one's called. I actually have to look this up. I just read this in October. Okay, goodness lord. It's called The Girls Are Never Gone. I'm like tripping this morning. Oh my gosh. Okay, so clearly, I forgot that you existed because I don't even remember this book's title. This is so embarrassing. Yeah, this book was fine. You know, it was fine. It was like a 3-star young adult book. Clearly did not stick in my memory very much. And then Survive the Night was definitely a book that I went into with way too high of expectations because I've loved all of Riley Sager's books before this one. And this one just ended up being like a fine, 3-star book for me, but I just thought that it would be a new favorite, and it wasn't. And 7 Days in June, this is definitely a book that I still think about quite often. I think this was a really beautiful romance, and I love that it followed two writers. And I just really love both Shane and Eva's characters. It's a big deal if I can even remember the character names. Like, that's a big one. It Happened One Summer. This is a book that I also really enjoyed. Like, it wasn't a new all-time favorite, but it was definitely one that I still enjoyed. If the Shoe Fits, this is gonna be... maybe We Got Lost in Translation, because I think I went into this book with way too high of expectations after loving The Charm Offensive, because this had a very similar kind of premise where we're following someone who's like a bachelor kind of thing, but this one was like a Cinderella retelling. My Heart is a Chainsaw, unfortunately, ended up being, long story short, it was a bad time. Sadly, I did not love this book the way that I wanted to, and I was just really, frustrated with how slow and boring I found this story to be. I just wanted so much more from this because I have previously enjoyed books from Stephen Graham Jones, and this one just wasn't for me. I ended up DNFing this one 250 pages into it or something. And then The Other Black Girl is definitely a book that I still think about. This book was pretty wild. The Perfect Family, this is one that I still think about too. I think this might be my favorite book from Robin Harding so far. I just think it was a really fun thriller. Chasing the Boogeyman is... oh god. I think this is one that I just went into it with way too high of expectations because everyone in the community was absolutely loving this. And I thought that this book was pretty mediocre and kind of strange, to be honest. I don't understand the whole an author writing about his own life in a fictional story kind of. It was very strange. The Book of Accidents ended up being one of my favorite books that I read this year, so it's got to go into my top tier. I remember it all too well. This book was just so fun. I don't know, there was just something about it. I just really loved the atmosphere in this book. And then Roommate is one that's I kind of forgot it existed, to be honest. I read it and it was fine. I think I even read this in September, but it was just a totally forgettable romance. There was nothing about this book that really stood out to me. False Witness is definitely a book that I still think about. I think this is one of my favorite BookTube picks of this year, and Karen Slaughter just always writes really, thought-provoking, interesting thrillers. The Night She Disappeared. This is definitely one that I still think about. I really enjoy Lisa Jewell's thrillers for the most part. This one did not disappoint. Such a Quiet Place. I'm gonna put this in. Long story short, it was a bad time because I was just really bored to tears with this book. And there was also way too many characters. It was really hard to follow at times. Come With Me was also a situation where it was like, long story short, it was a bad time. This book was just so slow and boring and not really a horror book. Like, I would not categorize this as horror because literally nothing happens and it's so boring. Alone in Space. See, this is where it's hard because I wish that I had a tier that I made for like middle of the road books, like 3.5 star books that like I don't think about them very often, but I also, it wasn't a situation where I went in with too high of expectations. It was just a situation where like it just ended up being fine, you know? But I think I'm gonna end up putting this one in maybe We Got Lost in Translation, just because I think I did expect a little bit more from this one, or I just expected that I would love it more than I did. And then same with We Were Never Here. I think that this is another one that just ended up being middle of the road, fine for me. I wasn't mad about it. It was just okay. Then The Royals Next Door. This is one that I definitely still think about. I think this was like a super cute romance. Like, really enjoyed that. The Good Lie. This is another one that I still think about a lot. I was actually really surprised by how much I enjoyed The Good Lie. I thought it was a really great time. Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney ended up being one of my favorite books of this year, so it's got to go in the top tier here. Such a fun thriller. Oh my gosh, I loved it. Loved all the plot twists. And then this one, you can barely even tell what this is, but it's the book This Thing Between Us. This is one that I read in October, and I've got to put this one in I Bet You Think About Me because this book was really interesting. White Smoke. This is one that I don't know, I kind of enjoyed it. I would put in I Bet You Think About Me. I know a lot of people are kind of like hating on this book right now, but I thought it was perfectly fine when I read it. I don't know. Not a Happy Family is another one that I still think about. I think this was a super fun thriller. It was like kind of predictable, but it was also just like a good time. Like, I read it all in like one sitting. Horseman is another book that I still think about quite a bit. I think this was a really interesting horror novel, and I don't really know much about Sleepy Hollow, but now I want to know more about Sleepy Hollow. The Ex-Hex was definitely a book where I went in with way too high of expectations, and I asked for way too much, because this just ended up being so mediocre and like not that great. And then The Mother Next Door. This is one that I'll put in I Bet You Think About Me because this was like a fun Halloween themed kind of thriller. Falling is a book that I definitely asked for too much. Cackle is another book that I think I went in asking too much because I really loved the first like 50% of this book. I thought it was so great, and then it just got really repetitive and like kind of boring by the end of it. Ooh, Black Girls Must Die Exhausted. This is definitely one that I still think about. And then A Dowry of Blood. I did give this one 5 stars. It's one of the most beautifully written books that I read this year, but I'm also going to put it in I Bet You Think About Me because I'm sure that I'm going to be thinking about this book a lot, but I don't think it's in the same tier as like my top favorites of the year. The Love Hypothesis is another one that like, I think it's going to go in I Bet You Think About Me because this is another one that I did really love it when I read it, but I don't think it's on the same tier for me as like these top tier books. So for that reason, it's going in the second tier of I Bet You Think About Me. Pearl by Josh Mallerman. This is another one that, I don't know, I kind of have mixed feelings about this book, but it also, like, I've just been thinking about it a lot since I've read it. And so even though I think this one ended up being, like, somewhere between 3 or 4 stars for me, I'm still thinking about this book a lot, so it's gotta go in this tier for me. And then The Soulmate Equation's gotta be, long story short, it was a bad time because this book had so much potential, and it just wasn't great. You know, it just did not end up being great. And then A History of Wild Places is one of my favorite books that I read this year, so it's going all the way to the top. One of my absolute top faves of the year, and this is one that I just read in December, but I'm already obsessed. I already want to reread. And then The Charm Offensive is another one of my absolute favorites of this year. So this is also going to go in the top. This is probably my favorite romance that I read in the year of 2021. I just thought it was so great. And then this book, I can't even remember what this is called right now either, but this is one that I just read. I think it's called Flower Crowns and Fearsome Things. Yes. This one is actually a nonfiction, so I'll have to move it all the way to the top here. But this one is a poetry collection that I just thought was like 2.5 out of 5. It had some pretty basic, in my opinion. It was pretty basic. The Wedding Ringer was super cute. I Bet You Think About Me because I do. The only thing that would have made this book better is if it was gay. Alright, next, Aristotle and Dante dive into the waters of the world. Whoa. Yeah, this is one that I still think about. It wasn't quite like my favorite god tier, top tier, the way that the first Aristotle and Dante was, but it was still really cute, and I still do think about it because I love these characters like so freaking much. And then 56 Days is a book that I'm not gonna lie, I kind of forgot that it existed. Even though this is like a booktube pick this year, I feel like this is one of the most forgettable books that I read this year. I feel like it could also fit into the category for, you know, like maybe I went in with too high of expectations because I was really excited to read a thriller that's like about COVID. But to be honest, like this one has stuck with me like the least almost out of like all the booktube picks this year. Like I almost forgot that it was a booktube pick this year because it just does not stick in my brain the way that the other ones do. And then Razorblade Tears is absolutely one of my favorite books that I read this year. This one was just phenomenal. I still think about this book all the time. It was such a rare experience. I just loved it so much. And then Wish You Were Here. I'm so sorry, but I have to put this book in No One Likes a Mad Woman, You Made Her Like That, because this book just kind of made me angry while I was reading it, and I was just really frustrated with the protagonist like the entire time I was reading this. The next book is Things That Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, and this one's gotta go in my top tier of the year because this book was just so unexpected and just so interesting and weird and dark, and I just loved it so much. And it's a novella. Like I got through it so quick and it was just so great. And then Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover. This has got to go in my tier of like I Bet You Think About Me because this book really made me think. Like it really did. And this book really it made me feel so many things, you know, because at times I was really frustrated with the main character, and at other times I just felt so much sympathy for the main character. I was just on a roller coaster of emotions with that book. And then I have You Better Be Lightning. This one's actually a nonfiction. It's a poetry collection. And this is a poetry collection that I really enjoyed. It was actually the last book that I read this year, and it's probably my favorite poetry collection of the two that I read this year. But yeah, these are all of the nonfiction books that I read this year. Like, that is it. Isn't that wild? Like, I feel like I should have read more nonfiction this year. And then we have The Snowman, which this one's gonna go in long story short, it was a bad time because it didn't piss me off enough to go in the Mad Woman category. But it also was just, like, not a fun time to read The Snowman. It had a detective point of view, which made it really boring. And then the last book on this list is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. And this one's definitely going to go in I Bet You Think About Me because I do think about this book. I think about the plot twist at the end of the book and how it's just so fascinating. And I think about the fact that I can't believe that I DNF'd this the first time that I read this book because this book was just so fun. You know, it was so great. I loved the audiobook for this one. Alright, so that is the final wrap-up. This top tier, it was rare. I was there. I remember it all too well. These are like all of my top favorite books of this year. I mean, if you saw my best books of the year video, then there's probably no surprises in this top tier. And then as expected, you know, this I Bet You Think About Me tier is probably the tier that I have the most books in, which is good because I do think I had, you know, the 4-star books that I read this year, it was the highest. Like, I gave the most 4 stars out of any other rating this year, so it makes sense that this is the tier that has the most books in it. And it's good that I'm, you know, reading books that make me think about them afterwards. Like, I love that. And then these are the books that I just, you know, I went in with way too high of expectations that they just could never possibly be met. And unfortunately, these ones just ended up being alright for me. And then I did have a couple of books this year that I kind of forgot that they existed, to be honest. Luckily, it's not too many. I'm kind of glad that these tiers are pretty slim. You know, like when you think about how I read 160 books a year, I just expect that these would be a little bit more filled out. But I'm kind of glad that they're very slim, you know? It means that I had a good reading year. And then on this reread shelf, I did have 5 books that I reread this year that I really enjoyed. Some of the Colleen Hoover books I did not enjoy as a reread, but I also did want to mention the fact that I did reread Near the Bone and The Push, so that's why there's only 165 books on this tier list, because those would have also gone into the reread category here, but I did read them for the first time this year too, so it's a little confusing. Overall, nothing too crazy, I think, nothing super unexpected. I mean, if you know my reading taste and you've watched some of my videos this year, then I'm sure you know how I feel about most of the books that I read this year, but I really love tier ranking them all like this and just seeing them in a little chart like this. I just think it's so satisfying and like the perfect way to end the year. So yeah, let me know if you enjoy this style of tier ranking where I use Taylor Swift lyrics to tier rank the books, because I think this could be something fun to do in the future and try to find like different lyrics for each year that I do this, just because I think it was so much fun. I actually had a list of like 20 different lyrics that could fit into each one of these, but I wanted to like narrow it down to just 8 tiers because I didn't want to go completely crazy, you know? But yeah, let me know your thoughts on something like this, and let me know how your reading year went. You know, I would love to know how many books did you get to read this year? What was some of the best books you read this year? Yeah, thank you so much for an incredible 2021. I'm so looking forward to starting all my 2022 content, and it's so satisfying that with the end of this video, I am done with all of my 2021 content. It's just so wild. It's been such an amazing year, and I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait for all of our adventures together in 2022. I just think it's gonna be such a fun year. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the new year. Thanks for watching. Bye.